Week on Capitol Hill. Want to run through some of the big issues up here first, and starting with the latest on negotiations on a new coronavirus relief package. Where do you understand those negotiations to be in your conversations with leadership?
Well, based upon what I've read in the news, as well as some of the things that have been said at various meetings, it appears that negotiations are still ongoing. We have, as you know, been in a sort of a stalemate for some time. At one point, we had a package of $3.4 trillion, and our friends across the aisle had a package of about $300 billion. We have come down to $2.4 trillion, and we're trying to get our friends to come up. There is another package for about $1.5 trillion that's being offered from a problem solvers caucus, and that is something that appears to be gaining a little bit of traction, but it's all being negotiated, and until we can get a final word from negotiators, it's hard to say where we'll end up.
And as those negotiations continue, we are not in a government shutdown today. That was averted when the Senate took action last night. The president signed it late last night. So this continuing resolution to fund the government goes through December the 11th. How confident are you that you'll be any more able to come to some sort of an agreement and a deal by December 11th after the election?
Obviously, the election will have a lot to do with it. We hope and pray that there will be an opportunity to compromise. But as you know, many things are happening. We have a Supreme Court position that is being considered, and that has an impact on politics, as well as just the notion that funding the government requires appropriations. And there are some who want to fund in a very austere way, and there are others who understand that in a time such as this, when we have a pandemic, we have to do things to help the people in this country who cannot go to work, many of them, because there is no job to be had because of things that have happened in various industries, and others who are going to find themselves without the ability to pay rent. And as a result of this, they may be evicted. So there are many things that are happening, and it's really going to depend on how the election eventually turns out. And my hope is that we'll be able to compromise once we get beyond the election.
Stepping away from Capitol Hill, I know you were off Capitol Hill earlier this week. You were out in Kentucky, in Louisville, amid the latest on the Breonna Taylor case. We're now expecting audio from the grand jury not to be released until tomorrow. Can you just give us your thoughts from being on the ground out there?
Oh, well, thank you very much. Let me thank some of the persons who were there to assist me. Pastor Tim Finley was there with the Kingdom Fellowship Life Center. Just a wonderful person, very knowledgeable, very much involved in the community, very much respected, and he gave me the necessary tour that I needed. I also had the opportunity to speak to the head of the Urban League there, an attorney, Attorney Sadiqa Reynolds, and she is president and CEO of the Urban League, and provided me with a lot of insight from a legal perspective. I did go down to the memorial. I did go out to where she actually lived, and had an opportunity to see the apartment that she lived in, not from the inside, but from the outside, and talk to some of the persons who were protesting. The protesters that I talked to were peaceful, and they really are concerned about what has happened to Breonna. To say that she was treated unfairly is a gross understatement. If you're talking to the protesters, they believe that she was treated not only unfairly, but unjustly, that injustice has been perpetrated upon her and, in fact, her family and all of society. So it was an opportunity for me to gain a lot of intelligence from the people who were there. And to see that apartment helped me to understand why one officer was charged with the recklessness that he exhibited when he was shooting through those sliding glass doors. Because if you see the apartment, you can see how that area was somewhat perpendicular to the area where the other officers were and where they were shooting at different angles into that unit. So it was very revealing. And if I may, one of the things that became very clear to me after talking to the pastor, Pastor Finley, is this: uh, the system isn't broken. I think that we say this, and I think we all have the best of intentions when we say the system is broken, but it's not. To say that the system is broken is to imply or indicate that at some point the system worked fairly and treated African Americans fairly. And you and I know that in 1619, when this venture started here in the Americas for us to some extent, there are other dates that would be available to us as well. But at that time, and when we had slavery, African Americans would be, could be, and were killed for just trying to seek freedom. And there are persons who were of European ancestry that we commonly call white. They could chase and hunt an African American, and they could impose a punishment of their choice just because a person was seeking freedom. And after we finally got the 13th Amendment, thanks to Abraham Lincoln and the radical Republicans, we finally got the 13th Amendment. We still had Black codes. They were specifically designed for Black people, and they allowed Black people to be charged with offenses and receive harsh punishment. There was convict leasing that was imposed, which is just another form of slavery. In Houston, Texas, we have the Sugarland 95. 95 people who were found in a grave that have been identified as being associated with convict leasing. And there was a common grave. And then, of course, we had the invidious discrimination in the form of segregation. And we still have this systemic, institutionalized racism that exists. So we can't say that it's broken because it is functioning, never has functioned fairly for African Americans. So given that premise that it has not functioned fairly, the system is, as the pastor said, and I concur, it's doing what it appears to have been created to do. The best example and the best way to get people to understand without insulting people, hopefully, and I don't choose to do this, but I want to speak truthfully. I love my country and I want to do things to help make it better. Breonna Taylor was in her home. It was at the midnight hour. She was there with her companion. She was an innocent person. She was not armed. Breonna Taylor heard a knock at her door, I suppose, and she and her companion decided they would at least seek to investigate from some distance. I'm not sure what it was, but her companion was armed, and persons came into her home, members of the constabulary. They were not dressed in police uniforms, they were plainclothes officers, and she lost her life. She didn't shoot at anyone. She was there in her home, and they were assuming that they were being invaded, and she lost her life. 3 white officers intruded, and she lost her life. Well, the best way to understand it is to say this. Assume that this is a 26-year-old, innocent white female. Assume that she's in her home. Leave all of the facts the same. She is innocent. She's done nothing wrong. And 3 African-American officers in plain clothes come into her home and shoot and kill her. Would this be a tragedy? Of course it would be a tragedy. It's a tragedy under any circumstances. But would it be a tragedy and also a crime if this were a white female? All of the evidence seems to indicate to me that it would be a crime of some sort. I won't dare get into what the crime would be, but it appears that it would be a crime. I have done my investigations, and I cannot find a circumstance where a white female was killed by an African-American officer who was not charged. In Houston, Texas, we had a similar circumstance, not the same, laws of difference, but when African-American officers went into a unit where there were white persons and persons were killed, those officers are charged. And across the country, when you find a Black officer killing a white female or white person, generally speaking, there is a trial, there is a charge filed at minimum. or there is some suspension. Something happens.
Well, Congressman,
So my point is, if I just may close with this, my point is, if we turn the tables and just kindly look at it from the point of view that I've called to your attention, it may cause us to open our eyes and see that the system is functioning as intended, because Black people get punished, they still do, and white people still go free.
Congressman, I know we have you until about 8:30 this morning, and plenty of viewers already calling in to chat with you. I'll just give out the phone lines. It's 202-748-8000 for Democrats, 202-748-8001 for Republicans, Independents, 202-748-8002. But we'll go right to Bonnie in Starkville, Mississippi, a Democrat. Bonnie, you're on with Congressman Green.
Yes. First off, I would like to say that I'm old enough to go back when they, in school, taught history, and the first person to own slaves was a Black man. And as far as racism, in the Civil War, it was the Confederates that were made up of Democrats, and they wanted, even after everything was over, some states did not want to have slaves, but the Confederates wanted slaves, and they still want slaves. People that talk against, I lost that train of thought. Let me go this way. Defund the police means to me to take away their money. Now, I agree that the police department needs to be reformed as far as certain, they need to be trained in everything in order to, to bring the temperature down, and any policeman that does just like with George Floyd.
That's Bonnie. Congressman, I'll let you jump in.
Well, thank you. The caller covered a lot of turf. Let me start with the Black person who owned slaves. It is true that there were some Blacks who owned slaves, and I condemn them to the same extent that I would condemn anyone else who took a person as a chattel and held the person in bondage. There is no reason to try to provide an excuse because of a person's color. And with reference to the Democrats versus the Republicans around 1868, when Lincoln was assassinated, it was the radical Republicans who pushed for some sort of reform for African Americans, Africans in America at that time. And they were fighting for the 13th Amendment, which actually freed the slaves. The Emancipation Proclamation was of help, but it was the 13th Amendment. But these were not the same people in terms of mindsets. The philosophies of the political parties has changed over the years, and you can't associate the Republicans at that time with the Republicans of today, or the Democrats at that time with the Democrats of today. So I still contend and really do want people to understand that this systemic discrimination that exists, invidious discrimination that exists, is something that Black people have to cope with and contend with. There is a mindset in this country, and it is very prevalent among many in the constabulary, not all. We don't condemn all police officers. My uncle was a deputy sheriff. But it is simply understood this way. Black people can't talk back to the police. You can't say, give me your badge number. I'm gonna turn you in. That kind of behavior from a Black person to a white officer many times will cause that officer to engage you in a very violent way. It happens. Officers believe that Black people must show them a level of respect that they don't always require of others. I've seen it happen myself. So I want people to understand that there's something going on, that the system isn't broken. That prosecutor in Louisville, he was the judge, the jury, and the prosecutor. He decided what facts the jury would see. This is usually something that a judge can do, but in the grand jury, the prosecutor does it. And he decided what law to present to them. And he presented the case as he saw it. His color does not mean that he did not have a bias. It is unfortunate, but many times African-American peace officers are much more likely to engage in a very vociferous way with African-Americans than white police officers. That happens quite often, not all the time, but it happens with some officers. So you can't let color become the question. There's a mentality that relates to Black people in general, and they are not respected to the same extent as white people are when they have these encounters with the police too often. Not always, but too often these encounters, because of a lack of respect, will cause a Black person to be harmed and a white person to simply have had an opportunity to have his or her say with the police.
From Mississippi to Pennsylvania, this is Mark in Carlisle, Independent. Good morning.
Good morning. A couple points. I have 2 points. Number one, the Breonna Taylor case. Let's get to the facts. First of all, she was on the search warrant. Second of all, it was a no-knock search. It wasn't a no-knock search warrant. They knocked, they announced. Number 3, her boyfriend, husband, whatever he was, he shot first. When you shoot, I mean, these cops, what do you want them to do? Dodge bullets? Now, let's get to my second point. You talk about the stimulus package. Let's just be honest here. You're holding it up. You're asking for way too much money. Go with the bipartisan bill. Number one, Democrats, to me, being honest, are responsible for these cities burning down. They're not prosecuting these hoodlums. We need law and order in this country. And
All right, got your point, Mark. A lot of issues there from Mark. Al Green,
Yeah.
which one do you want to take up?
Thank you. I'll start with the what he called the facts. It is true that her companion says that he shot first, Mr. Walker. But there are questions about the entry into the apartment. I was there and I saw the other apartments and how close they are to the door of Breonna's apartment. And they contend, Breonna's companion contends that they did not hear the officer announce themselves. Some 10 or more people who were in that area say that they didn't hear the announcement. There appears to be one person, unidentified, who initially indicated that he didn't hear the police officers announce who they were, but later on, after some time lapsed, changed that story and said, well, he did hear. So these are the kinds of things that a jury can resolve. They can be questions of fact for a jury to consider, but the prosecutor made his conclusions. And we're going to find out soon what he actually said to the grand jury or recommended to the grand jury. So I absolutely believe that this is one of those cases that should have gone to a trial jury, a petit jury, and let them determine what the facts are. Because if those officers entered that apartment unannounced, they were in effect carrying out a no-knock warrant. Whether it was such on paper or not, it was in fact a no-knock if they entered without announcing who they were, so that the people on the other side, Breonna and her companion, would know clearly that the police were coming in. In the state, the defendants in this case, well, the persons who were shot, Breonna was shot and her companion was not. They have the right to defend themselves. This is a stand your ground state. And in such states, persons can shoot if persons are intruding. And if it happens to be the police and they have not properly announced themselves, they have a right to shoot first and not be charged.
To Tampa, Florida, this is Billy, a Democrat. Good morning.
Yes, Congressman Green, thank you so much for being on this morning. Yeah, Charles Blow of the New York Times wrote a very interesting article about Breonna, the nature of Breonna Taylor's death, and he said that she was killed based on the disastrous war on drugs that has been racialized, and that these warrants were issued by a judicial system that unjustly that have based on this targeting or harassment of black folk for drug violations. But I want to know if you understand that the same thing is happening at the level. I'm a pharmacist. Okay, the same thing is happening at the level of black-owned pharmacies, and particularly in Texas and in Florida, where the black-owned pharmacies have been targeted by the Drug Enforcement Agency, and we've reported it to the Black Caucus, to Congressman Hank Johnson, and in your office here, and particularly in Texas, like I said, Texas and Florida, based on these same type of fictitious warrants for practicing pharmacy, basically while black. And we wanted to know, a group of us want to know, what are you going to do? We need to have hearings on this kind of thing, because what has happened is this has come like Tampa down here and around in Texas have become a Tulsa, where if you open up a black business as a pharmacist, and so all of a sudden you get a visit from the Drug Enforcement Agency, and they come in and they put together all these fictitious like warrants, and then you find your business has been ruined. They come in and seize your property and those sort of kind of things.
Got your point, Billy. Congressman Al Green.
Yes, I'm more than honored to receive what we call the privacy release form from you. If you'll contact our office, we'll get that privacy release form, and that's what gives us the opportunity to do something with the facts or the indications that you give us. So we'll look forward to receiving it. But with reference to this invidious discrimination, it is beyond policing. It exists in banking, and we've done the testing to find out if persons who are very qualified and who happen to be of African ancestry, if they go in to get a loan, we find that they will get a higher interest rate or get less in the actual amount of the loan than a less qualified person who is of European ancestry, what we call a white person in this country. So the empirical evidence can be gathered. The truth is, there is this systemic this discrimination, and it is institutionalized in certain circumstances, and it's something that we have to confront. And one of the best ways to confront it is with what I'm calling a Department of Reconciliation. We've never reconciled in this country. There was an attempt in 1868, but it failed. We need to reconcile. We need a Secretary of Reconciliation who reports directly to the President, and a department similar to the Department of Labor. With this person having the function, the duty, the responsibility of getting up every day to go into the office to end invidious discrimination in all of its forms, by the way, not just racism, but in all of its forms. I think that it's time for us to do this. And quite frankly, the climate may be ripe for this to occur after the election.
Less than 5 minutes left with Congressman Al Green, Democrat from Texas. A question from Lissa on Twitter asking simply, does Congressman Green support law and order?
Of course I support law and order. I don't support order and law. And there's a difference between law and order and law. Law and order assumes that the law is there and the law is what the constabulary is supposed to adhere to, as well as the citizen. So I support this. But what I don't support is what the president has, in a very clever way, signaled to persons. When he was talking to peace officers at a convention, I believe it was, he told them, when you're arresting a person, you don't have to be so nice. Well, he was sending a message to them that you can have a person within your care, custody, and control, and you can disrespect that person, possibly harm that person. That's not the kind of thing that we want, where a president will say, you do whatever you can to impose order, and I'll find the law to support you later on. Sheriff Opaya is a good example. He was a lawbreaker, but the president decided that he would use his awesome power to pardon, and he used that with Mr. Opaya, Sheriff Opaya. So I don't support order and law, which is what the president wants. Restore the order, and I'll make sure that I'll protect you because I have the magic wand, and I'll make up the law if I have to, but whatever I have to do, I'm going to take care of. That's not what I support.
Time for maybe just one or two more calls. Terry, thanks for waiting. Canton, North Carolina, Republican. Go ahead.
Good morning, C-SPAN, and good morning, Al. You're the person I'd really like to talk about this. I want to use my city of Asheville, North Carolina, as a starting block. It's not racism that the children here in Lee Walker Heights that have to get up every morning and walk out to the school bus and step across dirty hypodermics and use condoms. It's not racism that the children in Hillcrest, Beaverview, or Pisgahview that get up and go out this morning that have to deal with the winos, the crackheads, and the heroin dealers. It's not racism that the children there at Bartlett Arms that get up and walk to school have to deal with the hookers, the pimps, and the gangbangers. It's the elderly of those communities, people like you, Al, who have failed those children. You have failed those children because all you think about is great mama. Barack Obama is a grand example of this. He got to where he was because his rich white grandparents took care of him, while his deadbeat black dad abandoned him.
That's Terry in North Carolina. Congressman Green, give you the last couple minutes here.
Well, thank you very much. I want to close by indicating that I love my country, and a lot of what I do is out of love for my country. In spite of my history in the country and how my ancestors were treated, I still love it because we helped to build it. We made Cotton King, America great. We did a lot to become founding fathers and mothers who have not been acknowledged, my foreparents. Now, what he said about the various paraphernalia, the needles, I don't approve of any of that. And you can find that in certain areas where white people are disposing of needles. I've been to Skid Row, and you should go there. And you can see persons of many hues who are really down and out and need a lot of help. So I don't approve of that kind of behavior. But what I do say to you is this: when you examine the empirical evidence, you find that invidious discrimination exists in banking, it exists in healthcare, it exists in walks of life where we are not ordinarily bringing it to the forefront and discussing it. I don't mind all of the slings and arrows that are thrown at me, but someone has to speak truthfully about what's happening to African Americans in this country. Yes, I have on a suit, and I have on a tie that I happen to favor. It's one of my favorite ties. But I assure you, I too have been a victim of police misconduct in terms of how they told me to behave and stand up with your hands on the car. These things happen to us. And thank God for the body cameras, because the cameras are revealing what we have been saying. The unfortunate thing is that police departments don't have to have those cameras on. And if the camera had been on when the officers entered Breonna's apartment, we might know what the true facts are. The cameras were on when they came back later. So we believe that we ought to have the body cameras. We ought to have the technology that's available to help us get more evidence. But unless the officers are caught red-handed with the camera on, the knee on the neck, and you can actually see it, they get the benefit of the doubt. And that's unfortunate because many times they don't deserve the benefit of the doubt. My uncle was a police officer, deputy sheriff. I have great respect for the police, but there are some that are bad officers and they have to be dealt with. We cannot allow it to continue. I'm grateful to C-SPAN for giving me the opportunity to be on. C-SPAN is one of the great institutions in this country where speech, sometimes unpopular, can still be presented. I thank you so much.
Congressman Al Green, Democrat from Texas. I'm sure we'll have you on again on C-SPAN down the road.
Thank you.
Up next, we'll continue.